Today, we're greeted here by Frank Rose, talking about pattern recognition. I've read both of Frank's books, enjoyed them greatly, greatly. The Sea We Swim and The Art of Immersion. Frank, I'll pass it off to you so you can introduce yourself and get to it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Really thrilled to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity. And hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to switch to a presentation for a few minutes, and then we'll have a bit of Q&A and such like that. So bear with me for a moment while we do a screen share. I want to talk about pattern recognition. And to me, pattern recognition is really a key thing. It's really, the last couple of books I've done, The Sea We Swim In and The Art of Immersion, have really all been all about our understanding of reality. And they've also been about stories and the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell each other. And those two things, that is, reality and stories, are very closely connected as far as I'm concerned. A bit about me first. The reason I'm talking about this really has to do with stuff that happened close to 20 years ago. And that was, throughout the aughts, I was a writer for Wired magazine, and I was working at sort of the intersection of media and technology, which I have to say was a really fun thing to do. And one of the articles that I did around maybe 2006 or so was on 3D. And 3D, if you'll recall, was sort of the current version of it was pioneered by James Cameron. And I went to Montreal, where Cameron was on the set of another film by another director who was happened to be making the first feature film using the 3D camera system that Cameron and Vince Pace had invented a couple of years before. So we're at Mille Cité du Cinéma on the outskirts of Montreal. And, Cameron doesn't have a lot to do here, so it's great. I have a lot of access to him. And so, of course, at one point, I start asking him about his next film. His next film is, at that point, widely rumored to be Avatar, but he doesn't really want to talk about it very much. He's, understandably, perhaps it hasn't yet been officially greenlit. And what he does say, though, is this. And it was, for me as a writer, as a reporter, it was one of those sort of electric moments, right? An electric moment where that something critical is being said. And this is what he said. This idea of taking a film which is to say, taking a story and creating lots of different levels for it, so that you could go, you could go deeper if you wanted to, you could go as deep as you wanted to, and all of these new elements to the story would appear, and a whole set of new patterns, as he put it. And to me, that meant that it was the first inkling that I had that the way we tell stories is changing and changing because of digital technology. And this was something that Cameron was very committed to. It actually was not something he was able to do very well with the first Avatar, but he paved the way for, I think, a lot of other things that would be happening. And so the next thing that I did that kind of resonated with me in the same way was an article about alternate reality games. And in particular, it focused on Trent Reznor, who was about to come out with his Year Zero album. And if you'll recall, Year Zero was a sort of a concept album about a future, an alternate future where the United States has been taken over by a Christian military dictatorship. And so Trent had a problem, he thought. He had this concept album. He wanted to, introduce it as a concept album, not just a series of singles or whatever. We've come a long way at that point from, records, from CDs. And how do you get across the idea that all of these songs are connected, that they all tell a story? And what he came up with was connecting with this outfit called 42 Entertainment, the principles of which are shown here in this photograph. And he wanted to use them, to work with them to create almost like a real life version of what was happening. And it started off with, hiding thumb drives in bathrooms and in arenas and so forth, where they were having concerts, where they were having Nine Inch Nails concerts, and people found them. They stumbled across them, and that led them into this, down this immense rabbit hole. Where they would discover more and more things and uncover the story. And it turned out to be extremely successful for Trent and for 42. And it there had been alternate reality games before this, but this one kind of, really set the pace, I think. So to me, that was a realization that, together with what Cameron had told me, made me see that, as I mentioned, that the way we tell stories is changing. And what I eventually realized is that the way we tell stories is always changing in response to new technology. I mean, a great example is film. The motion picture camera was invented around 1890, and it was, changed things completely, but people didn't know how to deal with it at first. The first films were typically made with what's called the proscenium arch shot. And the proscenium arch shot meant that you stuck a camera in the middle of the theater, right in the center aisle, and filmed everything that was happening inside the proscenium arch. So, we're now in a situation where increasingly there is no proscenium, and that's kind of, I think, critical to the media that we have now and to our understanding of media. This little quote here appears on page 1 of the book, and it's really, I think, kind of captures my feeling about stories, my understanding of stories and how they work. So I want to go now into, I'm going to sort of tell this story in 3 chapters. So first, I want to talk about stories themselves. Then I'm going to talk about apophenia. Apophenia is being the idea that that we see things in many cases that are not there. In a way, it's sort of like, we have machines that hallucinate, obviously, and we tend to forget that humans hallucinate quite a bit as well. And then finally, I want to get back to the idea of reality and alternate realities, and talk about their relationship, perhaps. So now let's see. This book, Harari's book, Homo Deus, and his previous book, Sapiens, like many people, spoke to me quite directly. And this particular quote is something that I think is well, it really sums up my understanding of what stories do, of how stories work, of how we use stories to essentially make sense of the world. And not coincidentally, to make sense of ourselves and of our place in the world, our role in the world, and where the whole thing is going. Um, there's this idea that people take their role, take their understanding of their lives from the stories that they're told, from the stories that they make up, that they roll all of this together, and essentially they use that to create their identity. I think that's a brilliant and critical observation. Um, since he wrote this, I think a lot of people have come to this conclusion, have made this observation, but it doesn't negate the fact that is taking us into, I think, a new understanding of the role of stories. One of the things that really fascinated me as I was, studying stories as opposed to writing them, was the realization that until about 25 or 30 years ago, uh, uh, scientists, psychologists, all of that sort of thing, people in the sciences did not consider stories important. Stories were considered frivolous. They were entertainment. They were what you got when you turned on the TV or went to the movies, and they certainly weren't, worth studying in themselves. There's been a total sea change since then. The advent and sort of maturation of neuroscience has meant that the scientists are increasingly focused on stories and on the role that they play in our lives. And certainly what Harari says is sort of testament to that. But among beyond the scientific community, that's whoops, I'm sorry, I seem to have okay. Um, so beyond the scientific community, people have actually known this for a long time. I love this quote from Joan Didion. This is from her book, The White Album, and which she I think published in the early 70s. And in particular, I mean, the thing about we tell ourselves stories in order to live, that's a very famous quote. But what I think speaks to me at least even more is the notion of the sermon and the suicide. We take things that happen and we read we read meaning into them. Often we read meaning that isn't actually there. The diseases are a classic example. For many, many years before there was anything resembling a cure, tuberculosis was considered a sign of sensitivity, of your poetic nature. And it was this sort of romantic form of disease and ultimately death. AIDS, obviously, in the 80s and in the 90s, many people interpreted that as a sort of uh, um, revenge for against, I should say, people who were gay, people who were non-conforming, and it was like there were any number of right-wing politicians and media figures and religious figures who argued that this was something that that gays brought on themselves. Throughout history, disease has been viewed as a sort of a message from God. So this brings us to the idea of apophenia. So I want to talk about apophenia for a bit. As I said, apophenia is where you get ideas that don't actually make sense, and in particular, where you see connections that aren't really there. And there's any number of those, in particular, again, having to do with religion. This cartoon actually appears in the current issue of the New Yorker. I saw it yesterday for the first time, and this idea that people see religious figures, their faces on a grilled cheese sandwich, in clouds, in a teacup. This has gone on for a very, very long time. In fact, you may be familiar with this grilled cheese sandwich. It was sold on eBay. It's a 10-year-old sandwich, sold on eBay for $28,000 because it purportedly shows the face of the Virgin Mary. I personally find that a bit of a stretch, but who am I? I did ask Dolly to give me a piece of toast with the Virgin Mary on it. And frankly, I like this one a lot better. I don't think it's that much of a stretch. So finally, I want to talk a bit about reality and about the connection between the stories that we tell ourselves, between the things that we see, and our concept of reality. We tend to think that reality is that what's real is what we see, and that what we see is what's real. This is obviously not the case, for any of us. And to realize this, all you really have to do is think about the concept of the dog whistle. Dog whistles are, by definition, something that only dogs can hear. And what that means is that dogs and other animals can hear things that humans can't. The same with the visible light. What's visible to us is a narrow slice of light that does not include things that are visible to other animals. So we tend to forget this, but the bigger problem is the idea of apophenia, that we see things that aren't there. And another classic example is QAnon. QAnon, this sort of crazy conspiracy theory, completely loopy, zero basis, in fact, began in somewhat murky circumstances in the late 20 teens, and then with the pandemic, it kind of mushroomed and became much more virulent than it had been, to the point that, as Jessalyn Cook mentions here, it has taken over a fairly large portion of society and wreaked a great deal of havoc, both politically, socially, and personally for families of people who have, fallen into what's essentially a cult. But that leads to a sort of a bigger question, I think, of how do we tell what's real? How do we know what's real to begin with? And digital technology is taking us to a place very quickly where it's harder and harder to do this, harder and harder to make the distinction. In 2022, this fake video came out where it had Zelensky saying to his citizens that they should lay down their arms and surrender to Russia. It was a total fake, but it nonetheless circulated very widely on social media until they took it down. Around the same time, I was working on the sea we swim in, and I interviewed the CEO of a company in Europe that was devoted to fighting deep fakes. It's kind of a game of whack-a-mole, so not exactly an easy thing to do. But I was really struck by this quote, this thing that he said to me about how, what we're coming out of a time when we took it for granted that what we saw was real. What we saw in the media was actually there. I think social media has had a great deal of effect in eliminating that faith, but even more so, the fact that digital technology now allows us to manipulate images, video in ways that were inconceivable as recently as 15 years or so ago. And that's, of course, not even to mention generative AI and what it can do. So far, generative AI is for the most part pretty easy to make out, but that's probably well, almost certainly going to change. One thing that I do now as a member of the Digital Storytelling Lab at Columbia University is we have this awards program every year. We generally make the awards in April. It's called the Breakthroughs in Storytelling Awards, and it's where we want to recognize every year 12 projects, 12 storytelling projects in any form of in any medium that we feel kind of represent some kind of breakthrough, that a new development. And they are, these are all digitally informed story projects, but not necessarily digital themselves. This one was. This is a project called Dates that was created by a guy in London a couple of years ago. And what he did was he took a he created a series of female characters, female faces, completely AI generated, and made it so that um, you could take them and use them as a source of entertainment, whatever. Since then, of course, this has actually become a huge business. But talking with Ben Ditto is his name. Once again, imagine what's going to be happening in 10 years. And I think we're sort of rapidly getting into a place where it's going to be increasingly hard to tell what's real, and stories are going to be a kind of critical part of that, for good or not. Um, at the same time, there's a lot of people who we recognize in the Breakthroughs in Storytelling Awards who take a much more optimistic view, and I'm really glad for that. One of them is Rafik Anadol. You may well be familiar with his work. I became familiar with it several years ago, I think maybe around 2018 or so, when I did a story for the New York Times on this project that he had going for the LA Philharmonic, where he took the 100-year history of the LA Phil, and that had been digitized. He fed it through AI and various other various other things, and came up with a sort of a wild computer visualization that was projected onto the steel superstructure of the Walt Disney Concert Hall in downtown LA. Here's a short film that give you an idea. So the Breakthroughs in Storytelling Awards this year are coming up in a couple of weeks, April 13th. It'll be presented online. And the following day, we're going to have an in-person summit at the Eleanor Boone and Monroe Film Center at Lincoln Center in New York. So I would invite you to join us for either or both of these. We will have we'll put a link up shortly in the chat, and hope to see you there.
All right, Frank, that's fantastic. Thanks so
Yeah.
much. Okay, so all right, this is how we're gonna do it. If you have questions for Frank, go on camera, raise your hand, or and then we'll call on you and we'll start a conversation. But super, 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 super interesting. One of the things I'll also, if you want to just like if you don't want to go on camera, just shoot me a message in the chat, and I can ask the question for you. Or Okay. So, Frank, one of the things I was actually really interested in is, I remember reading in, I think it was Sapiens, how like, Yuval Harari talked about the formation of tribes and how stories exist in tribes, because they obviously, like, I have my
Right.
own individual stories, but then I have they're like my tribal stories. And then like, I'm probably part of like many tribes, like including this one. But I'm just curious, have you given any thought, like, what are some of your thinkings around that? And like how stories exist on a sort of a tribal level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of what QAnon is about. But it's part of what any, organization or faith or cult or, whatever, any group of people is going to have a series of stories that define them. And, we're intensely social creatures. And stories are kind of one of the chief ways in which we bond. So and we are part of being social creatures is really the idea that we belong to tribes and we think in tribal ways. We have a very much for better or worse us versus them mentality, and which is always sort of constantly fighting against, I think, our simultaneous tendency to be open to other people and so forth. These things are they exist in a continuum, and people are more or less inclined to one or the other, end of it. But we definitely we tell each other stories that reinforce our tribal nature.
Super interesting. Matthew had a question. You said he asked Matthew, you want to ask, or do you want me to ask?
Sure, I could
You go
ask.
ahead and ask.
I
You want
really
me
enjoyed your, by the way. It was a really fantastic read. Could you talk a little bit more about the Walking Dead's layers of storytelling? At one point in your book, you had a really nice diagram that was kind of at four levels. Can you talk a bit more about that and how you explore that and you see if other people doing that well?
Sure. Yeah, that's in a chapter, as you probably recall, about platforms and in particular narrative platforms. And we're all familiar, I think, with the idea of platform economies, the idea that companies like, well, any social media company, obviously, but also um, uh, any kind of company that any kind of company that exists to put people together. Even credit card companies, which put together, two distinct groups, merchants and consumers. And they exist to do that. It existed before digital, obviously, but it's become a really signature, facet of the digital economy. What I realized when I was working on the Sea We Swim In was that this really applies to stories too, and in particular, it applies to the audience for stories. And what we have there is essentially um, where traditional platforms connect different types of people, different groups of people. Narrative platforms essentially connect the same groups of people with each other. They connect audience members with the story, but they also connect audience members with other audience members. And that's become a sort of a critical feature of, I think, storytelling in the digital age. Through social media, through any number of other, factors. So what I ultimately came up with was this idea that these stories that you in creating the narrative platform, what you're essentially doing is creating a whole series of stories around one big story, one major story, and
It's funny from there. It's one, then it goes up to the rebound.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
oh no, it's okay. I think someone just
Okay.
went off. Yes.
Okay, fine.
Keep
Anyway,
going.
yeah. So the idea is that in creating a narrative platform, you are essentially creating a platform where uh, uh, fans of a TV show, a movie, a book, anything can connect with not only the story but with each other. And as with the observation that James Cameron had of, you could go deeper and deeper and the pattern would still hold. That's what that diagram that you mentioned tries to visualize, where you have, a level one story, as I call it, which is typically a one-to-many broadcast, but then it's connected to deeper levels that allow different forms of interaction among the audience.
Okay, so Rod asked me to ask this question, and this is a big question, but a simple one. What is the future of Hollywood's film industry?
That is a big question. I think I'm going to, for the moment, we'll have a thought experiment where we don't consider AI.
Yes.
But but I think that there is always going to be a market for and a demand for big, complicated stories. There's a sort of widespread belief that we have such limited attention spans now that really all we can handle is a micro story that lasts maybe a minute at most. This is completely contradicted by the success of not so much movies as television shows that have an arc that goes on for many episodes, often for many seasons, for many years, and we are. I have a friend in the UK, Matt Locke, who is the head of an organization called Story Things, a consultancy, And he has this theory of attention, which is, I think, completely accurate, which, if I'm not mangling it too much, essentially holds that we are uh, our span of our range of attention has expanded dramatically. We used to think in terms of half-hour sitcoms, hour-long TV dramas, 2-hour movies. Now it can be as short as 30 seconds or less. It can be as long as a story that unfolds over many years. And so I think that is something that we need uh, to take into account. And I think that's indicative of the fact, I mean, that very much suggests that Hollywood, in the larger sense of, a professional class of people who exist to tell stories, is not going anywhere soon. The wild card here, of course, is AI. Frankly, I don't know how that's going to net out. There's some super interesting things that are happening, not all of which, of course, are public yet. The hope, I think, and what many uh, uh, of these new developments are promoting is that AI will be a partner, not a replacement. And I think that AI is a brilliant partner. I've used it myself, of course, and I have a great deal of fun doing it. And not just to make Virgin Mary toast, but there's also a tendency and a group of people who are going to be naturally inclined to want to use AI as a replacement. And, we'll just have to see how that goes.
Okay. James had a question. He wanted me to read for him. All right. Traditional story relied on clear authorial voice. Immersion and interactivity dissolve that boundary, handing control over to the audience. If everyone is shaping the story, does narrative meaning collapse into pure chaos? Where's the line between deep engagement and storytelling anarchy?
Yes, that's a great question. Let me. I think that I think that it's a shifting line, like many lines these days, and there's a lot of there's a great deal of experimentation, and that's one of the reasons that it's shifting. Um, and but it is a key question, and the sort of uh, conventional approach is and not very imaginative approach is, the Bandersnitch solution, right? Where you have essentially a choose your own adventure type of story, where everything is preordained and you decide which button to push. This is, I think, really boring. But at the same time, you have video games like Grand Theft Auto, obviously, that exist in create a sandbox. There's lots of experiments of how this sandbox using AI can be um, how it can be expanded, how it can be used in different ways, and how it can be used in ways uh, exactly as your question suggests. Not just to tell your own story as you might playing with GTA, but to exist in an author's story. There's a project right now, there's a couple of projects, but there's one right now at USC that's going to be announced very soon that does exactly this, or promises to do exactly this, and we'll have to see how it works. But watch this space.
Very cool. I was also just going to do a shout out for Stephanie Riggs. She did a really interesting presentation called Quantum Narratives, and I know she just put out a
Right.
book.
Uh-huh.
But it's a kind of a mind-blowing idea of like, you know, how if it kind of reminded me of like if AI was like the dungeon master in a enormous, game
Right.
of Dungeons and Dragons. It was kind of mind-blowing. I followed most of it, I think. But I'm gonna have Ray ask a question.
Yeah, so I'm actually in the industry and also a professor at UC Cinematic Arts. I wanted to know how do you balance technological innovation with timeless storytelling principles?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't entirely know. I think it's and with any question of as with any question of balance, I think it's it's constantly changing. It's different for each for each kind of story, for each property. But um, I think that what's most important in this particular regard is to try to avoid the shiny object syndrome. We tend to get mesmerized by new technologies and what they enable us to do, to the point of losing sight of what we actually want to do or what we mean to do with storytelling. And I think it's just all too easy to fall into that trap. The I think the key elements of story are fairly well known. I lay them out in a fair amount of detail in the sea we swim in. But essentially, it has to do with the fact that stories take place over time. They involve some form of change and conflict. If there weren't any conflict, there's no reason for us to care. And without that, you don't really have a story. So, I think that any technology that enables you to tell a story can be great. We just need to not lose sight of what we're actually here for, as storytellers, as opposed to, what it can be fun to do. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I'll condense this question down a little bit. Um,
Okay.
So you'd mentioned apophenia, and in some ways it reminds it's sort of like the nostalgia for a time or place or person that never existed or actually experienced, or
Right.
this idea of the mind trying to grapple with missing experiences in their narrative. Where like could you unpack a little bit more about apophenia and also like where can you read more about this? Are there any good books around that?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a number of books about it. This is uh this is one I've just been reading. It's called The Pattern Seekers. It's by Simon Baron Cohen, who's a psychologist in the UK. And He's done some research about different brain patterns and what he calls systems thinkers versus people who are naturally more empathetic. And he finds that the extreme systems thinkers, there's a lot of overlap between them and people who are autistic. So it's a fascinating look at patterns in general and at how we go about determining what they are and how we are. There's actually a quiz in the back of the book where you can take the quiz and apparently find out if you're more of a systems thinker or if you're more empathetic. So anyway, I highly recommend the book. It's great fun.
All right, fantastic. All right, Karen, you did what I asked. You raised your hand on the thing. Let's do it. You're up.
Hi, Karen.
Hey, oh, thank you for your talk. It's so interesting. I wanted to ask you what you think the purpose of stories will be in the future.
Okay. I don't think they're going to change all that much. I think that, stories exist to to make sense of the world, to enable us to connect with each other. We're always bonding over stories, whether they're, sort of entertainment or something much more consequential. And I don't think that's really going to change. I think what can change, what could change, involves AI. There's so many there's so many unknowns about that now. We have really only I think the slightest idea of where it's going. You've done some, certainly very, very interesting work with AI and stories. And so I look to you for this, but but no, it's I think that AI is going to take us into some, very interesting places. And we've already seen, some of this with, like things like Notebook LM, and with this technology that's going to be unveiled from USC, from the Entertainment Technology Center, actually, next week. And yeah, I think that's how things are going to change. But I don't think I don't think we have a clear sense yet of where it's going to take us. So I look to people like you to help sort that.
Well, you talk about identity and pattern recognition and how stories relate to our sense of identity. I think it's going to be essential moving forward in the times that we're living
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
to
I think
understand
so.
ourselves, yeah, and our role within this story.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, exactly. And I think a critical question is going to be, to what extent does AI help us tell our stories, and to what
Mm-mm,
extent does tell stories on its own?
mm,
And I did a piece in the Times a couple of months ago about some people at Onyx, this center in New York, and who created a basically a story engine that looks like it creates stories that that are kind of vaguely rooted in mythology and that therefore look significant, important, in the way that mythology does, but in fact they're totally meaningless. And he the one of the guys who did this, Mark DaCosta, he did it with his partner Matthew Niederhauser. DaCosta told me that for to essentially it doesn't take that much to imagine what an AI system like that could do, what kind of stories it could generate. And you might want to ask yourself, whose purposes do they serve, and who's paying for it, and who's profiting from it. So I thought that was a very interesting take.
mhm. Thank you, Frank. I don't want to be greedy and gobble up all your attention, so I'll leave you to answer more questions. Thank you for a very illuminating
Okay,
talk.
thank you, Karen.
Josh is unmute, brother. You have to unmute.
I'm monologuing and no one can hear me. Okay, I think we only have a few more minutes, so we'll hopefully make this a quick one. Aramik, I'm going to let you have the last one. If I didn't get to your questions, I'll try to figure out a way to get it to Frank and get it answered in the follow-up. But Aramik, throw it out.
Cool. Good to see you, Frank.
Hi,
So
Army.
when you wrote The Art of Immersion, I remember very well when it came out. I feel like storytelling was really focused on digital culture. Like there was this big boom in social media and interactive websites, and um, no one was using the word immersion or immersive. Like you were one of the first people I remember using that word, and then it's a word that everyone grabbed onto, and it came to mean all these different things from VR to AR to Museum of Ice Cream. Like, how has immersion changed? And where do you see this idea of immersion going from, a decade ago when you wrote the book to where we are now and where it's moving into the future?
Right, right. Very good question. I'll tell a little story about that book, and specifically about the title for it. One of the hardest things to do as an author is to come up with a title. And I had written the entire book, and I still didn't have a title for it, or an acceptable title anyway. And so, I had all these terrible ideas, and I wrote them all down and sent them, many of them to my publisher, and they said, no, think again. So finally, what I did was read the book through, the manuscript, and the word that kept leaping out at me was immersion or immersive, or, it was a word that everybody used that had been interviewing for the book. So it was, in a way, you're very kind to say that I, was one of the first people. From that point of view, I was one of the last people to realize what was going on. But where it's going. I read a very interesting comment the other day, that immersion is like the deepest form of attention. And I hadn't actually thought of it that way, but it's quite true, and quite perceptive. We live in an attention economy, in an economy where what's scarce is attention, and what's ubiquitous is information, which is the exact opposite of what it was throughout most of history. And immersion is, to paraphrase the idea of the sincerest form of flattery, immersion is the sincerest form of attention. And I think, that's certainly one of the secrets of the success of, big, overarching stories of, entertainment forms like Game of Thrones, that sort of thing, that you can immerse yourself in them. But I think that we increasingly want to remove any barriers that exist between ourselves and the story and the experience, all of that. And, that's what's behind the rise of, immersive theater, which, in which there is no proscenium arch, there's no stage, it's what was behind Cameron's desire to invent 3D, because he saw it as a way of not, having the sword come out at you and scare you, as sort of the cliche of movie making has it, but of sucking you in. And, Spielberg, many years ago, I think around 2013 or so, in a conversation with George Lucas at USC, a public conversation, said something to the effect of, we're ultimately you're going to have to get rid of the screen. You're going to have to get rid of the square, this little square, the screen that we're all staring into right now. And I don't think anybody quite knows how that's going to happen yet, but it's certainly the promise of the holodeck from Star Trek, and And I think that's where, at some point or other, we're going to get to.
I love it. Frank, I think that was an amazing note to end on. I love this immersion is the deepest form of attention. That's an incredible line. So I'm
I,
just gonna
I,
hand it over. Oh, go on.
I should, yeah, sorry, I just interrupt but I wanted to say I should credit that to Mike Manello,
Sure.
yeah, who is extremely perceptive about these things and worked on some fascinating story extensions for Game of Thrones, among other things.
I love it. Well, I just want to, Frank, I'll hand it over to you to sort of give a sort of a one wrap up note. I will note for all the unanswered questions, I will try to get those answered for you. But Frank, hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Josh, and thanks everybody for listening to this and for your questions. I'd love to explore ideas like this and to trade ideas with you. So Future Spaces is just a great place to be. Thank you, Josh.
Oh, absolutely, Frank. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks everybody for joining. I love these talks. I love this. I love the conversations here, and hope to find places to continue them and create those layers of
Okay.
fractal meaning.
Okay.
All right. So we'll
And
hopefully we'll see you here next week. Frank, thanks again. Appreciate all y'all coming
okay,
out. Have a good one.
you bet. Thank you,
See you.
Josh.
Bye. Sure thing. Bye.
Thanks.